Scottish Borders is alive with stories and history about the Reivers and the Romans and raiders and Scottish wars of independence, and the whole place is a real hotbed of these tales. But there are one group of invaders that hit the British Isles and the Scottish Borders back in the 9th, 10th and 11th centuries, which really don't seem to figure in any of the folklore of the Scottish Borders. And those people are the Vikings. So the question today is, did the Vikings come into the Scottish Borders? Did they have any influence here? And is there any evidence left on the ground of that invasion and occupation? Of course there is. Starting off my mini adventure, if you like, today here in Ancram, the old churchyard in Ancram, a place where I've made many videos about different subjects: caves, yew trees, hill forts, Reformation. You know, it's a real melting pot of history, this little church in the middle of this little village of Ancram. But it's also, at this moment in time, the hub or the centre of research into these Viking relics or Scandinavian influenced relics in the Scottish Borders, and namely that is in the form of hogback graves. This is the site of the hogback grave in Ancram, but at the moment it's been removed for restoration purposes, and I think, you know, the people of Ancram have done a fantastic job raising money, and they're going to protect it with some sort of glass cover and make it, you know, future-proof it for further generations to admire and investigate, you know. I've been doing a bit of research, and apparently this hogback in Ancram, which I was kind of under the impression was the only one in the Scottish Borders, is not the only one. And there are a cluster of these hogback graves right in this vicinity around Ancram here. So today I'm going to go and look at these old churchyards and see if we can find any evidence of this Viking invasion or Viking influence in the central Scottish Borders. And also, it's a good chance to go and investigate these really old churchyards, which are probably, I think, no longer in use as churches, and it'll be interesting to go and see them as well. Vikings came to the British Isles to raid and plunder, to take home riches and fame even to Scandinavia. Legendary figures like Ragnar Lothbrok. But they ended up staying in the UK, forming communities and having a huge influence on the culture in some places. Some places like the Northern Isles of Scotland, the Western Isles of Scotland, the north of England. But really, was there any influence at all in the central Scottish borders? Well, that's what I hope to find today. And what you do see all over the north of England and other parts of Scotland is these Viking graves, which were known as hogbacks. Coped, tegulated gravestone covers. Really, really old grave covers. But are there any in the Scottish borders? Well, this old church here, St Helens, near Pease Bay, is part of the Scottish borders. It's sometimes easy to forget that, but it's right on the coast, and apparently there is an old Scandinavian grave in here. And this church really is very old, 12th century at least, and that's a theme of today's adventure. Everywhere I go is going to be a really, really old church, and it houses these really, really old graves. Yeah, there are so many old, forgotten, fallen graves in this graveyard. It's going to be difficult to find this hogback. Oh, this could be it. I think this might be it here. Yeah, this is it. You can see kind of buried in the ground here and covered in this protective layer, so clearly somebody has studied it and tried to protect it quite recently. But this is it. There you can see the roof here. These things were meant to represent Scandinavian homes, made the Viking burials, transformations, taking the person back to the place they came from. But this is it, yes. Let's see. Yeah, you can't see much detailing on it, it's very, very weathered. But this is it. Wow. Vikings were seafaring people. Most of their communities were built up around coastal areas. So you kind of expect to see that here. But apart from the one in Ancram, are there any other hogbacks in the central borders? Yeah, so this is Nisbet Kirkyard here. A place, if I'm honest, I didn't even know existed. The Scottish borders is full of these old kirkyards. Some of them have the church standing, others like this, where the church was demolished in the mid-1700s. It's been gone for years, hundreds of years. It's recorded as far back as the 12th century, this place belonging to Jedburgh Abbey. But the real interesting thing about this church was in the late 1800s, there was a huge hogback gravestone found in the cemetery somewhere. But where is it? Can we find it? Yeah, I just can't seem to find this stone anywhere in this graveyard. Don't know where it is. Oh, hold on, that's my phone. Hello? It's in Hawick Museum. Hawick Museum? Yeah, I suppose the bad news is that by the early 1900s, the stone here in Nisbet had been broken up into 16 pieces apparently and spread around the perimeter of the churchyard. But it was later taken over to Hawick, a big town in the Scottish Borders. It was taken to Hawick Museum and restored. And apparently it's in the museum in Hawick just now, but you know, I'm not really interested in seeing it in a museum, to be honest. I think we should go and visit some of the other churchyards on the list and see if the hogback graves are still in situ there. Okay, so the Nisbet stone has been lost to Hawick Museum, but let's move on to the next location, which is a bit further into Berwickshire towards the coast, at a place called Edrom. Let's see if this hogback stone survives in the churchyard there. This church is ancient, dates from way back in the 1100s, and apparently there's a really old stone arch in there still from the original church. But also, there was a Viking grave discovered here. Arch here that dates back from the 11th century church. Interesting. But where is this hogback grave? Now I've looked all over this quite large graveyard, and I can find no evidence of this hogback grave. There was a team of archaeologists here a few decades ago as well, and they could find no trace of it either. It's clearly been either buried in the sands of time or broken up and used for something else, which is probably what's happened to a lot of these. When you start to hear of all these Viking graves in the Scottish Borders, or Scandinavian inspired graves, it makes you wonder how many of our reaving ancestors are raiders and cross-country robbers from back in the 15th and 16th century. How many of these guys and ourselves are descended from Viking blood? Maybe that's why some of them were so mad, especially up in Teviotdale and down that area. But yeah, there's a very clear line of geography connecting these graves. They're only in this really small concentrated area here in the eastern side of the Borders. You don't find them any further west. But there are more sites than Edrom, with reports of hogback graves. So let's go and have a look at those. So the Ancram stone is gone, under preservation at the moment in time, so we can't see it. Nisbet stone is now in Hawick Museum somewhere deep in the vaults, probably, I don't know. The Edrom stone has disappeared. Nobody knows where it is. The bedrule is somewhere in the church, and we ain't going to see that either. So our last chance is this graveyard here. Limpet Law. The Limpet Law's in the middle of nowhere. I'm almost in the Cheviot Hills here, and the church itself is long gone. It was recorded way back in the 12th century, but now all that remains are a few gravestones. So is any evidence left in this graveyard of the Hogback stone? Let's find out. Yeah, luckily, quite astoundingly, the Limpet Law stone here does still survive and is still open and is still quite detailed. You can see the roof tiling detail on the top of the stone there. The Scandinavians constructed these or sculpted these stones to remind them of the houses back home, whether that be first generation Scandinavians who'd invaded the UK and Scotland, or maybe generations on trying to remember their ancestry. I don't know. Nobody knows who these people were. Amazing when you consider how old this stone is in comparison to all the other ones in the graveyard. Everything else in here is maybe 18th, 17th at a push century, probably newer than that. Whereas this 11th or 12th century, this was probably not the original place that this stone was laid. It's probably been brought here from somewhere else, who knows where. People don't even know if there were bodies under these. They might not have even been graves, we don't know. They could have been monuments to heroes lost at sea. Who knows what they were used for or who was buried under them. And that's what I really find so interesting about these stones. You know, we've investigated and researched the sculpture and the archaeology and how these things were constructed, but nobody knows the people behind it. Who was it in 12th century Scottish Borders that was constructing Scandinavian Viking gravestones? There you have it, the best piece of evidence, the best preserved and open piece of evidence you'll ever find in the Scottish Borders to suggest Viking influence and settlement in this area.